Hi everyone, I'm Tim and welcome back to another episode of T-Dog RC. And in this episode we are carrying on with the assembly of the Hangar 9 Ultra Stick 10cc version. In the last episode I finished up by getting the tail mounted, so the horizontal stabiliser and vertical stabiliser. So in this episode I've got to put the elevators on, the rudder on, and I'm going to get the engine mounted, and also before I actually permanently mount the engine I want to get all the CG set up and everything, so I've got to put the undercarriage on and some bits and bobs like that just to make sure I can get the CG set up correctly. So let's get it on the bench and let's get stuck in. Okay, so next thing I want to crack on with is getting the elevator mounted. Now it comes with this metal joiner piece which isn't glued in. But it is already, the holes for this are already cut out in the elevator and the grooves cut there. But it's a case of checking the sequence of this, because you can't glue the elevator together as one piece before you actually slot it into place with the hinges, because you've got this section here which actually comes down below the back of the horizontal stabiliser. So if you had this all set up and glued in place and the elevators joined before you went to put the hinges on, you couldn't do it because the metal bar would just hit this back piece. So what we've got to do is we've got to do one side first. I'm going to go with the right hand side. So I'm going to glue the hinges in position halfway. I mean, I can do that on both sides. I'll get that done. And then we are going to hold this in position. And then we've got to get some epoxy resin, fill this slot and that hole with some epoxy. And then we've got to slide this into place, making sure that this bar's gone properly into here. Then we'll wait for the epoxy to go off, and then once the epoxy's gone off, we can then CA the hinges into the horizontal stabiliser. And then once that side's done, then it's a bit easy. But then because the metal joining piece is already in place, then because it's being held by this right hand side, so then all we've got to do again is just fill that slot with epoxy, slide this on, and just glue it into position. The other thing it says to do, which I've already done, before you do anything really, is to check. Just move this up here a little bit if I can. I'll move it out of the way. So it says to check that the elevator sits nice and flat when the metal bar's in. And if it doesn't, then you have to obviously twist the bar to suit. But as it happens, out of the box, that's sitting nice and flat. So I'm happy with that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get these hinges in place. Going to mark them halfway, get those CA'd in. I'm going to drill the little holes as well, again like it says in the instructions. So I'm going to drill those in, just a little hole in the centre of the slot there, just to allow the CA to soak in. So I'll do that on both sides. And then what I'll do is, just before I go to actually glue it in position, I'll just show you how I've got it set up on the tail there. Okay, so just going to show you how I've got this set up then. I've got the hinges glued into the elevator. And then what I've done on the horizontal stabiliser, I've just taped some wax paper onto here, which is what it says on the instructions. So on there and there. And then, well, what I've actually found, I've just done it does also recommend that you do a test run, so you know how you're going to get this fitted in before the epoxy goes off. What it actually says to do is to get it into position and then put the epoxy in and then push it in. But what I've found is I can, just with this side, obviously I'm not going to be able to do it with the other side, but I can actually get this in. I can glue this in first basically, and I can then get this in position at an angle like that, and I can still get all 3 of my hinges in on this side. So and then just slot it in like that. So that's what I'm going to get done first. So I'm just going to get some epoxy and get that mixed up and put in here. I've also just given this a bit of a roughening up with some sandpaper just to give the epoxy something to bite onto. So let me just get some epoxy mixed up. Okay, so I've got my epoxy mixed up here, and then just going to, whoops, shaking a bit there for some reason. Just going to get that pushed into here. And down into that hole as well. And then just going to push this in. And then what I'm actually going to do is, yeah, sorry, I thought I'd put it on the wrong way around then, but there isn't a wrong way around. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to leave that to go off. It's 5-minute epoxy, so it shouldn't take too long, and it's fairly warm in here. So I'm just going to leave that a few minutes to go off. Then I'm going to slide it into position, which I shall show you in a second. Okay, epoxy's gone off now, there. So what I'm going to do is put this in at an angle like that. I know it's really a bit difficult to see on the camera. And then get my hinges in. So it's a little bit fiddly. That's 2 in. That's 3 in. Okay, and then just get this lined up with the end. Okay, and that's got that in now. And you can see there that the bars are in position, ready for the other side. With the other side, we have got to basically do this all at the same time. So, well, I've got to get the epoxy in and then push these hinges in. So I'll just do a dry run now, just to make sure everything lines up. And then we're going to push that right in. Yeah, that lines up really nice actually. You can see the end of the elevator there lines up nicely with the horizontal stab on that side, and same on that side, and the bar is connected there, so there, that's all moving, that's nice. So I'm going to take this back off now and get that epoxied. And I've got my wax paper there as well to stop the epoxy gluing the elevator onto the horizontal stab. So get a little bit of epoxy mixed up, get that glued in place, and then once that's in position, and again I'll leave it for 5 minutes or so for the epoxy to go off, and then I can just go in with my thin CA and just get all the hinges fastened in, and then that's locked in then, so that's good. Okay, so elevator's all sorted, so next I'm just moving on to the rudder. Similar-ish procedure, so we're just reading the instructions first. I've glued all the rudder hinges in place, and then before you actually slot this into position, you need to glue the tail wheel assembly on to the rudder. And again, they've already drilled and cut the slot for you, so just a case of filling this up with epoxy again, sliding this in place, letting that go off, and then once that's gone off, then we can get this positioned on the fuselage, CA these hinges in place, and of course fasten this down with a couple of screws. So I'll just get this epoxied in and then I'll show you fitting it to the fuselage. Okay, so I've temporarily, well, I've pushed the rudder in place. This is all glued up now, the tail wheel's glued into the slot, the epoxy's gone off, and I've got the rudder positioned exactly as I want it, so it's all nicely lined up. Just need to make sure at the bottom here that you've got this lined up with the top of the vertical stabilizer, because it would be quite easy, I guess, just to slot this in and forget to check that, and then you'd be pretty gutted once you realise that you've not got that lined up. So that's all good. So all I've got to do now is just drill a couple of holes in here, make sure that this is lined up. Okay, now the only thing is, this rear hole is just a bit close to the back of the horizontal stabilizer, but it should be fine. So we'll get that lined up. And what I'm going to do is just drop a little bit of thin CA into these holes, just to make the threads a little bit harder in there, because you're only going into bolts of wood. And if you don't do that, you might find that they come off, or they don't bite very well. Just got a bit of a problem with my CA bottle there. It's just leaking a bit and it's gone onto my fingers. I hate that, because you can't get it off. Anyway. Right, and in the bag they provide you with 2 tail wheels, which is quite nice. Oh, it actually says 2 different types of tail wheel are included. The foam is softer. This results in less noise when being used on asphalt. So they've done a... Right, well, I'll use the rubber one then, I guess, because I'm going off grass. But that's quite a nice touch. And then we've got a couple of screws here as well. I don't think I'm going to put the tail wheel on just yet, because it's going to be a bit of a pain, I think, having that on while I'm still sort of messing around with it. So let's just get these screwed in place. Okay, that's on. We'll get that one done. Don't want to tighten it too much. That's perfect, I think. Okay, and then we can get this rudder CA'd in place, and that's the tail surfaces done. So I'm going to get that done, and then we move on to getting the engine mounted. And then what I'm going to move on to is, well, I want to mount the engine next, but before I do that I need to check the CG. So I'm going to do some bits and bobs, like getting the undercarriage just fastened in place temporarily with the wheels as well. Get the servos in where I think I'm going to put them, and then get the engine sort of temporarily just sat into the engine mount, and then check the CG and see where we are, whether the engine needs to slide around, whether I need to move the battery, or with this, I mentioned in the previous episode that it gives you the option. You can either put the servos here inside the radio bay like you would normally, or you can put them right at the back here. This slot's pre-cut, so it's quite nice that they've done that, and it gives you that flexibility depending on what sort of power plant you've got up front and how tail heavy it is, etc. So that's going to be my next thing. I'll get all that mocked up, and I'll show you what I've done, and then I'll show you just checking the CG and everything, so you can see that. Right, well, it's been a couple of days since I did the last clip, and everything's been going really well with this, putting this model together. Everything fits really nice, hardware seems okay, and I'm really pleased with the way it's coming together. That is until last night when I was going to come and do some work on it, and last thing I did was CA the CA hinges in place for the elevator and the rudder, then left it for a couple of days, came to it last night, and just went to test them, and you know they'd sort of seized up, which they often do. So I just moved the elevator just to crack it and get them moving again, and it went really floppy, and I was like, wow, those hinges are really loose. And then what I noticed is the hinges have actually cracked in the middle. On this right hand side, all three had cracked. The left one's not too bad, but now I've been messing around with it. This one's now cracked here, and it's an absolute disaster, to be honest, because I've obviously already put, you're not meant to be able to get the elevator in without having this joiner section glued in place, or sorry, with having that joiner section glued in place, and obviously I've now done that. So I'm so annoyed because, like I say, everything's been going really well with it, and you know it's been really enjoyable to work on, and this is just an absolute nightmare. But what I'm going to do is I've basically got not a lot of choice. I've cut through. Well, these have snapped anyway on this side, and then on this side I'm going to have to cut through the hinges that are still on. So these two here, because that one's now snapped as well there. And then I'm going to replace those with some pin hinges. So I've already drilled the holes out on this side, and then on here I've marked, just put 2 marks. So because with the pin hinges you've got to get it all lined up perfectly. You've got no wiggle room to slide it around. So I'm going to do that, and then try and get this put back into place. Try and slide this into place whilst obviously having this joiner bar in, because this joiner bar is epoxied in now. There's no way I can take it out from one of the elevators. So gonna have a mess around with that. Hopefully I'll be able to sort it. Hopefully these pin hinges will be, you know, much better quality than the CA hinges. I've never had an issue like that before. The only thing with the CA hinges that you get with this kit is they've got a hole down the middle which allows the CA to sort of wick in. They've got like a slot in the middle, and I read online, and a couple of people have had a similar issue, although not immediately. You know, as they're building it, it's more after they've flown it a few times. They've noticed that the hinges have started to crack in the middle. So I don't know whether it's just something to do with the design of these hinges, but I've never had a problem like that before with CA hinges. Yeah, just really, really annoying. The only good thing is that I obviously spotted it before I've gone to fly it, because that could have been complete disaster if the hinges had let go whilst in flight. So anyway, I'm going to have a battle now with this, and I will show you when I've done it. Right then guys, I managed to get the elevator sorted with the pin hinges. Got a little bit of a gap between the horizontal stabilizer and the elevator, much more than I had before with the other hinges, but it's back in position, it's gluing, it should be solid, so hopefully that crisis is resolved. So what I'm on to now is I've just got it on the floor of my workshop, and I appreciate the view from the camera's not the best, but basically I need to check the CG now. So what I've done is I've put some servos in here, and also the throttle servo in here, and then I've even put the fuel tank in. I've got the battery pack in, I've put the undercarriage on, as you can see, I've put the tail wheel on, so I've tried to get as much stuff going as I can. I think that's pretty much all the main bits on, so we've got the weight about right, and then I've put some stickers underneath here where the CG is, and it's 4 1/4 inches from the leading edge, or 108 mils. And at the moment, obviously, I've not got the engine on, and of course it's very tail heavy, as you would expect. But then if I put this on, you're just going to go on there like that. I'm hoping that it's going to balance out, because it does feel very tail heavy, even though obviously I didn't have the engine on. So let's see what that does to us. It's better, but it's still... So obviously I can move this forwards, but I don't want to move it too far forwards. Okay, so that's balancing. It's still sort of tail heavy there, but I don't want to move the engine any more forwards than that, so I'm just going to mark that out, because I've still got to put the prop on, I suppose. The tank's empty, so obviously I'll have a tank full of fuel. Potentially what I could do is put the battery underneath the tank, but I'm not sure I like the idea of that. But it would fit. But of course, if we get some sort of a leak, that's going to be bad news, because if the battery shorts out, then that's the end of the plane basically. So I don't think that's going to be an option. Let's try that now. Let me just go and get the prop and put that on, because obviously the prop goes right at the end. We've got the nose cone as well, which actually that might be a bit big, is it? No, that's going to be okay. Let's try this again. Yeah, that's balancing about spot on now. Because I do want this to be quite neutral, because it's an aerobatic plane, so I don't want it to be mega nose heavy. There's a few other little bits as well. I've got the wheel pants to put on. There's a few minor bits. Trying to think what else there is that I need to put in. I've got receiver and battery monitor, but they literally weigh a couple of grams. But I think maybe with the wheel pants on and having the engine positioned about there, we're going to be pretty much bang on. So I think that's all good. And obviously it will have fuel in, so it will be nose heavy when it's flying, but you should always obviously do the CFG without any fuel. So yeah, I think that then is going to be absolutely spot on. So now what I can do is start getting the engine mounted. So I think that's going to wrap this video up. Hope you're enjoying watching this and the assembly of this Ultra Stick Hangar 9. Or should I say Hangar 9 Ultra Stick. If you are enjoying it, then I'd really appreciate it if you'd help me out by clicking the subscribe button. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, which is fantastic. And if you're into nitro and balsa and you know, these sorts of videos, building balsa kits and that kind of thing, then you're going to want to subscribe to my channel. You could also help me out by giving me a thumbs up and hitting the like button. And if you want to see the next episode, then if you hit the bell and you're a subscriber, then it will alert you when I release the next episode. And of course, for everyone who has subscribed and all those people that support me and all the comments I get, I really appreciate it. If you have got any comments, obviously stick them down below and I'll always get back to you. And I'll see you soon for the next one.